Hey everyone! Before we begin tonight's journey, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy deep dives into Dragon Ball lore. I always love hearing from you in the comments, so let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now, settle in, get comfortable, maybe dim the lights, and let's ease into one of the most heartbreaking stories in all of Dragon Ball. Tonight, we're exploring the tragic tale of Future Trunks, a warrior who experienced more loss, more pain, and more devastation than perhaps any other character in the entire franchise. This is a story about hope born from despair, about strength forged in the fires of apocalypse, and about a hero who never stopped fighting even when everything he loved was taken from him, not once, but twice. His journey spans decades, multiple timelines, and encounters with enemies ranging from soulless androids to a god who believed that genocide was divine justice. By the time his story concludes, Future Trunks will have lost his entire world, watched it be erased from existence itself, and been forced to start over in a timeline that isn't even his own. To understand the tragedy of Future Trunks, we first need to understand what his timeline lost. In his world, Earth once knew the same peace and prosperity that we saw in the main Dragon Ball timeline. Cities bustled with life, their streets filled with millions of people going about their daily routines, completely unaware of the cosmic threats that lurked beyond their planet. Families lived in safety, children played in parks, and the infrastructure of modern civilization hummed along with the comfortable reliability that people in peaceful times take for granted. The ordinary citizens of Earth had no idea that their safety, their very survival, rested on the shoulders of a small group of extraordinary warriors called the Z-Fighters. These heroes had defended the planet from threats that would have seemed impossible to the average person. They had faced alien conquerors who could destroy planets with a single energy blast, galactic tyrants who ruled through fear and overwhelming power, and beings whose strength transcended anything humanity could comprehend. Yet time and again, Earth's defenders had prevailed, pushing themselves beyond their limits, unlocking new transformations and techniques, and somehow always finding a way to protect their home. Among these defenders stood Son Goku, Earth's greatest champion, and the warrior around whom so much of the planet's fate seemed to revolve. Goku's journey had begun in the mountains where his adoptive grandfather Gohan found him as a baby. A Saiyan sent to Earth with a mission to destroy it that he never fulfilled, thanks to a head injury that erased his violent programming. From those humble beginnings, he had grown into something unprecedented. He had defeated the Red Ribbon Army as a young teenager, stopped King Piccolo's reign of terror, saved the planet from his own Saiyan brother Raditz, even at the cost of his own life, returned from the afterlife to defeat Vegeta and Nappa when they came to conquer Earth, journeyed to the distant planet Namek to stop the universal tyrant Frieza, and emerged victorious time and again against impossible odds. Goku represented something more than just raw power, though his strength was undeniably tremendous. He was the symbol of Earth's resilience, the embodiment of the idea that good could triumph over evil, that determination and a pure heart could overcome even the most overwhelming darkness. When situations seemed hopeless, when enemies appeared unbeatable, Goku always found a way. He inspired others to push past their limitations, to believe in possibilities that logic said were impossible. His presence gave the Z Fighters confidence that no matter what threatened their world, they would find a way to protect it. Alongside Goku fought warriors who had become legends in their own right. There was Piccolo, the reformed demon king who had once sought to conquer Earth but found redemption through his bond with Goku's son Gohan. Piccolo's wisdom and strategic mind had guided the Z Fighters through countless battles, and his role as Gohan's mentor had unlocked potential in the young half Saiyan that even Goku's training had not fully revealed. Vegeta, the proud Saiyan prince who had once come to destroy Earth, now called it home, though his pride would never allow him to admit openly that he cared about protecting it or the people who lived there. Vegeta's relentless pursuit of strength, his desperate desire to surpass Goku, drove him to push himself harder than perhaps any other warrior, constantly training and seeking new levels of power. Krillin, Goku's best friend since their childhood training under Master Roshi, stood ready to defend his world despite knowing he was vastly outmatched by the cosmic-level threats the Z Fighters now faced regularly. Krillin represented the courage of humanity itself, the willingness to stand up and fight even when you know you're the weakest person on the battlefield, because the alternative is allowing evil to go unopposed. Yamcha, Tien, and Chiaotzu rounded out the team, each contributing what they could to Earth's defense, each having trained for years to reach levels of power that would have been unimaginable to normal humans. And then there was Gohan, Goku's young son, who possessed latent power that surpassed even his father's tremendous strength, though he had not yet learned to fully access or control it. Gohan was a gentle soul, more interested in studying and learning about the world than in fighting. He had never asked to be a warrior, never wanted the responsibility of defending Earth. But circumstances had forced him into that role time and again, and each time he had risen to meet the challenge, unlocking deeper reserves of power when his loved ones were threatened. This was the world that future Trunks would have been born into under normal circumstances. He was the son of Vegeta and Bulma, a union that seemed unlikely given Vegeta's personality and Bulma's history with Yamcha, but one that nonetheless produced a child with incredible potential. Bulma was one of Earth's greatest scientific minds, the heir to Capsule Corporation, and the genius who had helped make so many of the Z Fighters' victories possible through her technological innovations. From creating Dragon Ball radars that could locate the mystical orbs, to building spaceships that could travel to distant planets, to developing the gravity chambers that allowed the Saiyans to train at intensities impossible in Earth's normal environment, Bulma's intellect had been as crucial to Earth's defense as any warrior's strength. The boy born to Vegeta and Bulma should have grown up in a world of relative peace, perhaps training with his father and the other warriors, learning to harness his Saiyan heritage, but never facing true existential danger. He should have had the luxury of childhood, of growing up with both parents, of discovering his abilities gradually in a safe environment. He should have known his father, learned from Vegeta's pride and strength, experienced the complicated but genuine bonds that the Saiyan prince was capable of forming. But that is not what happened in Future Trunks' timeline. Instead, his world would descend into an apocalypse that would claim nearly everyone he knew and loved. The divergence point, the moment when his timeline split from what we know as the main Dragon Ball storyline, came not with a battle or an invasion, but with an illness, a mysterious heart virus, unprecedented in its lethality and completely untreatable with the medical knowledge available on Earth, began to spread. And in the cruelest twist of fate imaginable, it found its way to the one person whose survival mattered most for Earth's future. Goku fell ill in age 766, approximately 6 months before the arrival of the androids that would devastate Earth. The virus attacked his cardiovascular system with aggressive efficiency, targeting his heart in ways that medical science had never encountered before. Despite his incredible Saiyan physiology that had allowed him to recover from injuries that would kill ordinary beings, despite his body's remarkable ability to heal and adapt, despite the fact that he had survived battles that should have been absolutely fatal, Goku had no defense against this microscopic enemy. His body, strong enough to withstand planet-destroying energy blasts, durable enough to endure the crushing gravity of planets many times more massive than Earth, resilient enough to fight even after being beaten within inches of death, could not fight off a simple disease. There is something profoundly tragic about that disparity. The man who had faced down the Emperor of the universe and emerged victorious was brought low by something invisible, by an illness that would have killed any normal human and killed him just the same. The illness progressed rapidly, far more quickly than anyone expected or hoped. Goku's tremendous strength began to fade as the virus ravaged his system. His energy depleted day by day, his ki growing weaker as his body devoted all its resources to fighting the infection and losing ground with every passing hour. The man who had achieved the legendary Super Saiyan transformation on planet Namek, who had defeated Frieza himself in single combat, who had become the first Saiyan in 1,000 years to reach that mythical level of power, found himself bedridden and helpless, unable to do anything but struggle to breathe as his heart failed him. His friends and family watched as he deteriorated, gathering around him with expressions of worry and grief that grew deeper as days turned into weeks. Despite all of Bulma's scientific genius, despite her access to the most advanced technology on Earth through Capsule Corporation, despite her desperate efforts to find some treatment or cure, no medicine could be developed in time to save him. The heart virus was unlike anything they had encountered before, unprecedented in its structure and behavior, resistant to every treatment they attempted. Chi-Chi watched her husband slip away, powerless to help him despite all the times he had saved her and their sons. Gohan saw his father dying and could do nothing but stand vigil. His incredible power useless against this enemy that couldn't be fought with energy blasts or physical strength. When Goku finally succumbed to the heart virus, he died of natural causes. Those words might seem simple, might seem like a mere technicality in describing someone's death, but in the context of Dragon Ball, they carry devastating implications. This detail would prove catastrophically important for future Trunks' timeline. The Dragon Balls, those mystical orbs scattered across Earth that had saved the Sea Fighters so many times before by wishing their fallen comrades back to life, had a fundamental limitation that most people never had to confront. They could not revive someone who had died of natural causes. Death in battle could be undone with a wish to Shenron. Death by murder, by accident, by any violent or unnatural means could be reversed, bringing warriors back from the afterlife to fight again. The Sea Fighters had relied on this safety net multiple times, knowing that even if they fell in combat, the Dragon Balls could restore them. But death by disease or old age was final. Once someone died of natural causes, no wish could bring them back. No amount of pleading with the eternal dragon could change that fundamental rule. Goku was gone forever. The psychological impact of this loss cannot be overstated, cannot be adequately expressed in words. Goku had been more than just the strongest fighter on Earth, more than just a warrior who happened to be incredibly powerful. He had been the emotional core of the Sea Fighters, the beating heart of their group, the one whose pure spirit and unwavering optimism inspired others to push beyond their limits, even when situations seemed hopeless. When impossible odds arose, when enemies appeared who outmatched the Sea Fighters in every measurable way, everyone knew that Goku would find a way to overcome them. He always did. His presence provided more than tactical advantage or raw power. It provided confidence, hope, the belief that no matter how dark things became, they would find a way to protect Earth. His death left a void in the team that went far beyond mere power levels or combat ability. Without him, the Sea Fighters had lost their center, their greatest warrior, their source of inspiration and hope. Perhaps most crucially, they had lost their confidence that they could overcome whatever threatened their world. Goku's very existence had given them courage, knowing that he would be there, that his strength would support them, that his ingenuity would find solutions to impossible problems, had allowed the other Sea Fighters to face threats that logically they should have fled from. Now that foundation was gone, ripped away by something as mundane and cruel as a virus. But grief would have to wait. There was no time to properly mourn, no opportunity to process this devastating loss, because looming on the horizon was a threat that Goku's absence made infinitely more dangerous. Dr. Gero, the scientist behind the Red Ribbon Army that Goku had destroyed as a child, had been working for years on his ultimate revenge. Deep beneath his laboratory, hidden in the mountains, his greatest creations waited in stasis, sleeping in their containment pods, their systems in standby mode until the day they would be activated. Androids, 17 and 18, siblings transformed into cyborg weapons of unimaginable power. Their human bodies augmented with technology that gave them strength beyond what any normal fighter could achieve, programmed with one singular purpose that drove their artificial intelligence: to kill Son Goku. But Son Goku was already dead. On May 12th, age 767, androids 17 and 18 emerged from Dr. Jiro's laboratory and began their programmed mission. They searched for Son Goku, their systems scanning for the Saiyan warrior. Their artificial intelligence focused on the task they had been created to accomplish, not knowing that their target had already died months earlier from the heart virus. In the main timeline that we know from the anime and manga, these androids would eventually be stopped, with 18 even becoming a hero and marrying Krillin, settling into a peaceful life and having a daughter. But in Future Trunks' timeline, everything went catastrophically wrong. The Z fighters assembled to confront the android threat, gathering together to face this new danger just as they had faced so many threats before. But this time was different. Without Goku, without their strongest warrior and the center of their team, they were hopelessly outmatched. These were not ordinary opponents that could be defeated through determination and training. Not enemies that would grow tired or make mistakes or show mercy. Androids 17 and 18 possessed infinite energy reserves. Their reactors, providing them with unlimited stamina, never tiring, never slowing down, never depleting their power, no matter how long they fought or how much energy they expended. They felt no fear of death or defeat. They showed no mercy or hesitation in combat. They could not be sensed through key detection like normal fighters, making them impossible to track unless you could see them directly, robbing the Z fighters of one of their most crucial tactical advantages. Worse still, they were significantly more powerful in this timeline than they would be in the main timeline that we're familiar with, for reasons that remain unclear, but were confirmed by Future Trunks himself when he spoke about the differences between his world and the past he visited. The battle that followed was not a heroic struggle where the Z fighters gave their all in a desperate bid to protect Earth. It was a massacre. Vegeta, the proud Saiyan prince, who had achieved the Super Saiyan transformation in his relentless quest to surpass Goku, who had finally reached the legendary form that had eluded his race for a millennium, fell despite his power. His final moments are not detailed in canon, not shown or described in the manga or anime. But we can imagine the fury and disbelief of a warrior prince who had trained himself to the breaking point, who had finally achieved the transformation that represented the pinnacle of Saiyan strength, only to find it meant absolutely nothing against these mechanical terrors. Vegeta would have fought with everything he had, his pride refusing to let him retreat even as it became clear he was outmatched. He would have unleashed his most powerful attacks, transformed into Super Saiyan, and pushed that form to its limits, done everything in his considerable arsenal to destroy these androids. And it wouldn't have been enough. Piccolo, whose wisdom and strategic mind had guided the Z fighters through countless battles, whose tactical genius had helped them overcome enemies that pure strength alone could not defeat, was killed. His Namekian abilities, his regeneration that could restore him from almost any injury short of complete destruction, his techniques refined over years of training and combat, none of it saved him from the androids' relentless assault. Krillin, Goku's best friend since childhood, the strongest human on Earth, perished trying to defend his world alongside warriors far more powerful than himself. Yamcha, Tien and Chiaotzu, warriors who had trained for years to reach levels of power that would have been unimaginable to normal humans who had dedicated their lives to protecting Earth, all fell before the androids' overwhelming might. The androids killed them all in a single encounter. One battle, one day, and Earth's defenders were eliminated. The speed and efficiency of their defeat speaks volumes about how utterly outclassed the Z fighters were without Goku's presence. These were warriors who had faced down elite Saiyan soldiers and survived, who had traveled to planet Namek and fought against Frieza's forces, who had trained for years, specifically to prepare for the android threat after being warned it was coming. But against 17 and 18 in this timeline, with Goku already dead and unable to lead them or provide his strength to turn the tide, they didn't stand a chance. Only one warrior survived that initial encounter. Gohan, Goku's son, managed to escape with his life, fleeing from a battle that claimed everyone else who fought in it. How he survived when more experienced and more powerful warriors fell is never fully explained in the canon material, never detailed with certainty. But we can speculate that his hidden potential, the tremendous latent power that had manifested in brief moments when his rage peaked, may have given him the strength to escape where others could not. Perhaps the androids focused their attention on the other fighters, seeing them as more immediate threats, giving Gohan an opportunity to flee when the battle turned completely against the Z fighters. Perhaps some instinct for survival, some desperate burst of speed, allowed him to retreat when it became clear that staying meant certain death. It was not a heroic escape, not a tactical retreat undertaken as part of some larger strategy. It was simply survival, pure and desperate, the terrified flight of someone who had watched everyone around him die and knew he would be next if he didn't run. And so Gohan became Earth's last defender. A teenager who had just lost his father to illness months earlier, who had now watched his mentor Piccolo die, who had witnessed Vegeta and all the other Z fighters killed before his eyes, suddenly bore the weight of his entire planet's survival on his shoulders. He had never asked for this responsibility, had never wanted to be a warrior in the first place, had dreamed of becoming a scholar rather than spending his life fighting. But circumstances had forced him into this role, and now he was completely alone in it. Gohan had lost his father to the heart virus months ago, watching helplessly as the illness consumed the strongest man he had ever known. He had lost his mentor Piccolo to the androids, the Namekian who had trained him and helped unlock his potential, dying in the same battle that claimed so many others. He had witnessed Vegeta, his father's greatest rival, killed before his eyes. Every person who might have guided him or fought alongside him, every warrior who could have shared the burden of defending Earth, was gone. Gohan was completely, utterly alone. The androids did not conquer Earth in any traditional sense of that word. They did not establish an empire with themselves as rulers, did not demand tribute or subjugate the population to serve them, did not set up any kind of governmental structure or system of control. Their behavior was far more disturbing because it seemed to lack any greater purpose or goal beyond the violence itself. Android 17 and 18. in this timeline killed for sport, for entertainment, for no reason that made any logical sense to the terrified humans trying to survive their reign of terror. They destroyed cities not for strategic reasons, not to achieve military objectives or secure resources, but seemingly out of boredom or amusement, as though the deaths of thousands of people meant nothing more to them than a game. They hunted humans like prey, tracking down survivors and killing them with the casual indifference of children crushing insects beneath their feet. They terrorized the population not to achieve any goal or further any agenda, but simply because they could, because there was no one strong enough to stop them, because they had been programmed to kill Goku and found perverse satisfaction in killing his species instead, now that their primary target was already dead. Their actions had no pattern, no predictability that might allow people to avoid them. They would appear without warning in a city that had seemed safe, unleash devastation that left thousands dead and infrastructure in ruins, then vanish just as suddenly. Within a short time after their activation, a third of Earth's entire population was dead. Think about what that means in concrete terms. Billions of people lived on Earth before the androids emerged. In just months, hundreds of millions of them were killed. Cities that had stood for generations, that housed millions of residents, crumbled into ruins that stood as monuments to the civilization that had existed there. Survivors huddled in hidden shelters or abandoned areas far from population centers, always fearful that the androids might appear without warning, that they might be the next targets of 17 and 18's inexplicable cruelty. There was no pattern to the destruction, no way to predict where the androids would strike next. Sometimes weeks or months would pass without any sightings, giving false hope that perhaps they had shut down or moved on, that maybe the nightmare was finally over. Then they would appear again, attacking a settlement that had let down its guard, leaving fresh devastation in their wake and extinguishing any hope that had begun to grow during the quiet period. The world descended into post-apocalyptic nightmare. Infrastructure that humanity had built over centuries collapsed within months. Power grids went dark as generating stations were destroyed or simply ceased functioning without maintenance. Communication networks failed, isolating communities from each other, leaving survivors with no way to warn others or coordinate any kind of organized resistance. Governments ceased functioning as their centers of power were demolished and their leaders killed or scattered. The normal rhythms of civilization that humanity had built over millennia, the systems and structures that allowed billions of people to live together in relative peace and prosperity, simply stopped working. What had once been a thriving planet, home to a civilization that had reached into space and achieved wonders of technology and culture, became a graveyard dotted with pockets of desperate survivors clinging to life in the ruins. The cities stood empty, their buildings crumbling, their streets silent except for the wind whistling through shattered windows. Nature began reclaiming urban areas as humanity's presence shrank. Plants growing wild through cracks in pavement, animals taking up residence in abandoned homes and office buildings. Into this hell, into this world of death and ruins and terror, Future Trunks was born. Trunks came into the world at a time when the very concept of childhood had become an impossible luxury that few could afford. There were no peaceful nurseries waiting to welcome him, no baby showers where friends and family gathered to celebrate new life, no joyful announcements or proud parents showing off their newborn to a community happy for their happiness. His birth likely occurred in hiding, in whatever secure location Bulma had managed to create within Capsule Corporation or some other facility, with his mother doing her best to create some semblance of safety in a world where safety no longer existed. Every cry from the newborn could potentially draw unwanted attention from androids that might be in the area. Every moment had to be measured against the possibility that 17 and 18 might appear without warning, forcing everyone to hide or flee. There was no room for the normal chaos and noise that accompanies a baby. No tolerance for the mess and disruption that new parents in peaceful times can accept with exhausted smiles. Survival depended on remaining unnoticed, and a crying infant is one of the most difficult things to keep quiet. Bulma raised her son without a father to help her shoulder that enormous burden. Vegeta had died before Trunks was even born, killed by the androids months after Goku's death from the heart virus, falling in the same battle that claimed so many of Earth's defenders. Trunks would grow up never knowing his father, except through whatever stories his mother told him, never experiencing Vegeta's presence firsthand. He would never see Vegeta's pride, that fierce Saiyan determination that refused to bow to anyone. He would never witness his father's power, never watch Vegeta train with the intensity that had driven him to surpass his limits time and again. He would never experience the complicated but genuine bonds that the Saiyan Prince was capable of forming. The way Vegeta's gruff exterior hid a capacity for love and protection that he would never admit to feeling. Trunks was the son of one of the universe's most powerful warriors, but he would have no father to guide him through the discovery of his own Saiyan heritage. No parent who understood what it meant to be a Saiyan and could teach him to harness that potential. All he would have were his mother's stories of a proud prince who died fighting to protect a planet he had once come to destroy. The world Trunks grew up in bore absolutely no resemblance to the Earth his mother had known. The peaceful planet where she had grown up as the pampered daughter of one of the richest families on Earth. Where there had once been thriving cities filled with millions of people going about their lives, now stood hollow ruins that housed only ghosts and memories. Buildings that had housed thousands of people sat empty and crumbling, their windows shattered into glittering fragments, their structures damaged by android attacks or simple neglect as weather and time took their toll without anyone to perform maintenance. Nature began reclaiming urban areas as humanity's presence shrank to a fraction of what it had been. Parks became overgrown jungles, their carefully maintained paths disappearing beneath aggressive vegetation. Roads cracked and sprouted weeds that pushed aside pavement, eventually breaking apart the neat patterns that had once guided traffic through city streets. The sounds of civilization that had once filled the air constantly. The hum of traffic and construction, the voices of crowds, the background noise of millions of lives being lived simultaneously were replaced by an eerie quiet, broken only by the wind whistling through abandoned structures and the calls of animals that no longer feared human presence. Resources became precious in ways that people in the old world could never have imagined. Food had to be scavenged from abandoned stores and homes, their supplies taken by survivors desperate to feed themselves and their families. Gardens had to be cultivated in secret, hidden places where they wouldn't attract attention, kept small enough that they couldn't be easily spotted by androids flying overhead, but large enough to supplement scavenged food with fresh vegetables. Clean water required careful management, with survivors collecting rain and melting snow, or risking trips to contaminated sources that might make them sick, but at least wouldn't let them die of thirst. Medicine became almost impossible to find, making even minor injuries potentially life-threatening. A broken bone that would have been a temporary inconvenience in the old world could now lead to permanent disability or death if infection set in. Diseases that had been easily treatable with antibiotics became death sentences once the supply of medicines ran out. Childbirth, which had been relatively safe with modern medical care, became dangerous again as women gave birth without doctors or hospitals or the equipment that could save their lives if complications arose. Bulma's genius allowed her to maintain some technology, running Capsule Corporation facilities on backup generators and keeping essential equipment operational through sheer brilliance and determination. But even her incredible intellect had limits when the entire industrial and technological base of civilization had collapsed. She couldn't manufacture replacement parts that required factories that no longer existed. She couldn't access materials that came from mines or refineries that had been destroyed or abandoned. She could maintain and repair what she had, could innovate and improvise solutions to problems that would have seemed impossible. But she was working with a finite supply of resources in a world that produced no new ones. Trunks' childhood consisted primarily of hiding. When the androids were known to be in the area, when someone spotted them or word spread that 17 and 18 had been seen nearby, everyone sheltered in place, staying as silent as possible, praying that the androids would pass by without noticing them. He learned from a very young age that the world was dangerous, that monsters existed who killed without reason or mercy, that his very survival depended on remaining unseen and unheard. These are not lessons that any child should have to learn. They are not the building blocks of a healthy childhood. They leave scars that go beyond the physical, creating a baseline of trauma and hypervigilance that becomes inescapable, that colors every experience and shapes how a person sees the world for the rest of their life. There were no schools where he could learn to read and write, no playgrounds where he could make friends and play games. No normal childhood experiences that children in peaceful times take for granted. While children in the world before the androids learned their letters and numbers, played tag and hide and seek with classmates, and gradually discovered their interests and talents through exploration and experimentation, Trunks learned about survival. He learned to be quiet when noise might bring death to him and everyone around him. He learned that the ruins surrounding his home had once been places where people lived and laughed and loved before the androids came and destroyed everything. He learned that hope was a fragile thing that could be crushed at any moment by forces he was powerless to stop. But he also learned that one person still fought back against the darkness. One warrior still stood against the terror that had consumed the world. Though the androids had killed nearly all of Earth's defenders in a single battle, though the world had fallen into ruin and despair, though years had passed with nothing but loss and tragedy, Gohan had not given up. And as Trunks grew, old enough to understand what was happening around him, old enough to grasp the scope of the catastrophe that had befallen his world, Gohan became his hero. Gohan had changed dramatically from the gentle boy he had once been, transformed by trauma and necessity into something harder and more determined. The scholar who had studied with Piccolo not just to fight, but to understand the world. The son who had wanted nothing more than to make his parents proud and perhaps one day become a researcher rather than a warrior. That innocent child died with the rest of the Z fighters on that terrible day when the androids emerged. What remained was something forged in the fires of loss, shaped by 13 years of lonely battle against enemies he could not defeat. For 13 long years, Gohan waged a desperate war against androids. 17 and 18. He could not defeat them, could not overcome their combined strength no matter how hard he trained or how cleverly he fought. Every encounter made that painfully clear, hammering home the reality that he simply was not strong enough to win. Even as a Super Saiyan, a transformation he had achieved sometime after his father's death and the loss of his friends and mentors, Gohan simply could not match both androids at once. The circumstances behind his first Super Saiyan transformation were never revealed in the canon material. But it can be presumed that he reached this milestone after watching his friends and loved ones get killed by the androids, his rage and grief unlocking the legendary power that had been dormant in his Saiyan blood. In individual encounters, he could hold his own for a time against one of them, perhaps even gain the advantage briefly if he caught them off guard or pushed himself to his absolute limits. But they always fought together, and together they were unstoppable for someone at Gohan's level of strength. The future androids were confirmed to have been holding back against Gohan during their battles, extending the fights for their own amusement rather than ending things quickly. They toyed with him, treated their encounters as entertainment rather than serious combat, which made the situation even more psychologically devastating for Earth's last defender. Yet, Gohan kept fighting despite the futility of it. When the androids attacked a city, reducing buildings to rubble and killing civilians by the hundreds, he appeared to drive them off, saving what lives he could, even though he knew he couldn't truly stop them. When survivors were cornered with nowhere to run and no way to defend themselves, he intervened, buying precious time for people to escape while he engaged the androids in combat. He could not win the war, could not end the threat that hung over humanity like a sword suspended by a fraying thread, could not reclaim the world from the nightmare it had become. But he could buy time, could save some lives, could provide a flicker of resistance in the darkness that had consumed Earth. He became the planet's symbol of defiance, the last sea fighter, the final obstacle standing between the androids and the complete annihilation of humanity. The cost of this resistance was carved into his body in ways that went beyond simple scars. During one encounter with the androids at Superworld Amusement Park, when Trunks was still young and untransformed, Gohan lost his left arm in circumstances that demonstrated both his dedication and the cruelty of his enemies. Gohan and young Trunks had responded to the androids' attack on the theme park, with Gohan transforming into a Super Saiyan to battle Android 17, while Android 18 observed. Although Gohan initially gained the upper hand against 17 alone, 18 soon joined the fight, and together they overwhelmed him completely. Trunks, despite being hopelessly outmatched and knowing he couldn't contribute meaningfully to the battle, couldn't help but jump in when he sensed that his mentor was in trouble. But his intervention just made him a liability, another person Gohan had to protect while fighting for his life. Trunks was quickly knocked unconscious by the androids, and Gohan attempted to wait them out, hiding with his unconscious student amidst the debris of the destroyed theme park, hoping the androids would eventually leave. The androids had no patience for this strategy. They decided to rain energy attacks down on the entire amusement park, bombing the area indiscriminately to draw out their targets. Gohan and Trunks refused to give up their cover, staying hidden even as explosions tore through the ruins around them. But the KE blast bombardment was what scarred Gohan's face and severed his left arm when he shielded the unconscious Trunks from a deadly energy attack. It was a brutal display of the androids' callousness, their willingness to destroy everything around them just to flush out their prey. Gohan had one senzu bean with him, a precious remnant from the world before when such magical healing items had been more readily available. He gave it to Trunks, saving his student's life while his own grievous injuries went untreated. Trunks took Gohan back to Capsule Corporation, where his mother, Bulma, did what she could to treat injuries that would have killed any normal person. Gohan eventually recovered, though his left arm was gone forever, and he resumed training Trunks with a determination that had only grown stronger. From that point forward, for the remaining years of his life, Earth's last defender fought with only one arm. Every battle, every transformation to Super Saiyan, every desperate attempt to protect survivors was accomplished by a one-armed warrior who refused to surrender even when his body had been maimed and his chances of victory had dropped from slim to nearly non-existent. Think about what that means, about the sheer determination required to continue fighting under those circumstances. Imagine being the last hope of an entire planet, knowing you are outmatched, knowing you cannot win, knowing that each battle might be your last. Imagine doing this for years, with injuries that would have ended anyone else's fighting career, with no support system and no realistic hope of victory, with the weight of billions of dead and the survival of the remaining millions resting entirely on your shoulders. Imagine the exhaustion, not just physical, but spiritual and emotional, of fighting a war you cannot win against enemies who never tire, who possess infinite energy, who treat your desperate struggles as amusing entertainment. That was Gohan's existence for 13 years after the androids killed his friends and mentors. 13 years of lonely battle, of watching people die that he couldn't save, of returning home injured and exhausted, knowing that tomorrow or next week or next month he would have to do it all again. But something changed during those long years of hopeless warfare. Gohan came to realize, with the cold clarity that comes from facing your own mortality repeatedly, that he would eventually fall. Either the androids would kill him in one of their encounters, landing a blow he couldn't recover from, or simply overwhelming him through accumulated damage, or time and the injuries piling up on his body would rob him of the strength to continue fighting. When that happened, when Gohan finally fell, Earth would have no defender at all. The flicker of resistance he provided, small and inadequate as it was, would be extinguished completely. The androids would have free reign over what remained of humanity, with no one capable of even slowing them down. Unless someone else could be trained to carry on the fight when he was gone. Bulma's son, the half-Saiyan child named Trunks, represented the only possibility for a new defender. He possessed Saiyan blood inherited from his father Vegeta, which meant he had the genetic potential for incredible power if properly trained. He was young enough that Gohan could teach him from the beginning, shape him into a warrior, guide him toward accessing the Super Saiyan transformation that seemed to be the minimum requirement for even standing against the androids. If Trunks could awaken as a Super Saiyan, if he could surpass the level Gohan had reached, if he could achieve power beyond what the one-armed defender had managed to attain, then perhaps he could succeed where his master had failed. It was a desperate hope, the kind born from having absolutely no other options available. But it was hope nonetheless. And in a world as dark as the one they inhabited, even desperate hope was precious. And so Gohan took Trunks as his student. The relationship that developed between Future Gohan and Future Trunks went far beyond the typical dynamic between teacher and student. Over the years, they spent training together. They formed a close bond that filled crucial emotional needs for both of them in a world that had taken almost everyone they loved. For Gohan, Trunks represented hope for the future, a successor who might accomplish what he could not, but also companionship in a desperately lonely existence. For 13 years, Gohan had been alone in his fight, the sole remaining Z-fighter with no peers to stand beside him or share the burden he carried. Training Trunks gave him someone to talk to, someone who understood the weight of their responsibility, someone who could relate to the unique trauma of growing up in the android apocalypse. For Trunks, Gohan was everything. He was the mentor who taught him to fight, unlocking his potential and showing him how to harness his Saiyan heritage. He was the hero who still stood against the darkness when everyone else had fallen. He was the older friend who provided guidance and support in a world where such relationships were rare and precious. Gohan represented the kind of person Trunks wanted to become, the ideal of the warrior who never gave up, no matter how hopeless things seemed. Their bond was one of the few bright spots in a world defined by loss and fear. Their training took place in the ruins and wilderness around what remained of civilization, far from areas where the androids were likely to appear. Gohan pushed Trunks hard, knowing that the boy's survival and Earth's future depended on unlocking his potential as quickly as possible. They would spar for hours, with Gohan using his experience and skill to compensate for fighting with one arm, teaching Trunks to read opponents' movements and anticipate attacks. He showed Trunks how to control his Kai, how to fly, how to focus his energy into devastating attacks that could level buildings or carve through mountains. But Gohan also taught Trunks about more than just fighting techniques. He passed on the philosophy that had sustained him through years of impossible struggle. The belief that as long as you continued fighting, as long as you refused to give up, there remained hope for victory, no matter how distant it seemed. He taught Trunks about the world before the androids, sharing stories of his father Goku and the other Z-fighters, keeping alive the memory of heroes who had given their lives trying to protect Earth. He told Trunks about his own father Vegeta, helping the boy understand the proud Saiyan prince who had died before his son was born. These moments of connection, of passing down history and values and hope, were just as crucial to Trunks' development as the physical training. They gave him context for why they fought, reminded him that Earth had once been worth saving and could be again, provided him with role models and ideals to aspire toward. Gohan became the father figure that Trunks had never known, filling a void in the boy's life that went beyond martial arts instruction. Trunks came close to achieving the Super Saiyan transformation during his training with Gohan, getting tantalizingly near to that breakthrough that would unlock the legendary power sleeping in his hybrid blood. Gohan could sense it, could see the potential building in his student, knew that Trunks was on the verge of something extraordinary. But despite all their training, despite years of effort and dedication, that final breakthrough eluded Trunks while Gohan still lived. He would transform, would achieve that legendary status, but only after experiencing a loss so devastating that it shattered something fundamental inside him. As Trunks grew stronger, as he developed from a child into a teenager, capable of contributing to combat, he began to believe that together they might finally defeat the androids. The dynamic duo of master and student, fighting side by side, might accomplish what Gohan alone had failed to achieve. For 13 years. It was a beautiful dream, one that gave both of them hope during their training sessions and the quiet moments when they talked about what they would do after the androids were finally destroyed. But Gohan knew better. He had fought the androids too many times, had tested himself against them too often to harbor such illusions. He knew that even with Trunks fighting beside him, even with 2 warriors instead of 1, they would still be hopelessly outmatched. Android 17 had eventually revealed to Gohan that he wasn't even using half of his power during their battles, that he and 18 were merely toying with Earth's last defender for their own amusement. The androids could end Gohan anytime they wanted, but they extended the fights because his struggles entertained them. This knowledge, this understanding that he was fighting enemies who could kill him effortlessly but chose not to because his suffering amused them, must have been psychologically devastating. Every battle Gohan survived was not due to his skill or strength, but because the androids permitted him to survive. They treated him like a toy, something to play with until they grew bored. Gohan never shared this crushing revelation with Trunks. He let his student believe they had a chance. Let him hold on to hope, because taking away that hope would serve no purpose except to demoralize the boy who represented Earth's future. Better to let Trunks believe that with enough training, enough dedication, they could eventually prevail. The day came in age 780, 3 years before Trunks would travel back in time to warn the past about the android threat. The androids attacked Pepper Town, reducing another settlement to ruins and slaughtering civilians who had no way to defend themselves. Gohan and Trunks both sensed the destruction, both prepared to respond to the attack as they had done so many times before. But this time, Gohan made a decision that would change everything. When Trunks insisted on coming along to fight, Gohan agreed initially, perhaps not wanting to hurt his students' feelings or crush his determination. They flew toward Pepper Town together, master and student preparing to face the androids as a team. But somewhere during that flight, Gohan's resolve crystallized. He knew, with the certainty that comes from years of experience, that this battle would likely be his last. Something about this encounter felt different, felt final, and he refused to let Trunks die with him. Gohan knocked Trunks unconscious mid-flight, a swift strike that rendered his student senseless before the boy understood what was happening. He lowered Trunks gently to the ground in a safe location, far from the battle that was about to unfold, and continued on alone. It was an act of love disguised as betrayal, a master protecting his student, even though it meant fighting alone against impossible odds. Gohan confronted Android 17 in the ruins of Pepper Town, transforming into a Super Saiyan for what would be the final time. Fighting with only one arm against an opponent who possessed infinite energy and had been holding back during all their previous encounters, Gohan held his own in a tense battle that demonstrated just how far he had pushed himself over the years. For a time, he matched 17 blow for blow, his golden aura blazing like a beacon of defiance against the rain that had begun to fall. But he was outnumbered. Android 18 joined the fight, and together the siblings overwhelmed Earth's last defender. Gohan fought with everything he had, every technique he had mastered, every ounce of power he could summon from his exhausted body. He pushed beyond his limits, beyond what should have been possible for someone in his condition, driven by desperation and the knowledge that if he fell, Earth would have no protector until Trunks was ready to take his place. It wasn't enough. It had never been enough, would never have been enough against enemies this powerful. The androids killed Future Gohan during that rainstorm in Pepper Town, ending 13 years of lonely resistance. The last sea fighter fell in the ruins of a city he had tried and failed to save, his body broken by opponents who had never taken him seriously. Trunks awakened from unconsciousness and immediately sensed that something was terribly wrong. He felt Gohan's energy fading, growing weaker with each passing second, dimming like a candle in the wind. Panic seized him as he flew toward that fading key signature, racing against time, desperately hoping he was wrong about what that weakening energy meant. He found Gohan's lifeless body lying in the rain-soaked ruins of Pepper Town. His mentor, his friend, his hero, the person who had meant everything to him, was gone. The one-armed warrior who had fought for 13 years against impossible odds had finally fallen. The last defender of Earth, the final Z fighter, lay dead in the mud and rain. In that moment, something broke inside Trunks. The grief was overwhelming, a tidal wave of loss and rage and despair that threatened to drown him completely. He had lost his father before he was born, had grown up in a world of death and ruin, had survived the android apocalypse through luck and his mother's protection. But Gohan had been there, had been the one constant source of hope and strength in his life, had shown him that resistance was possible, even when victory seemed impossible. And now Gohan was gone. The rage that consumed Trunks in that moment, the grief and fury and absolute despair, unlocked something that years of training had failed to achieve. His power surged as his emotions peaked, his hair flickering between black and gold as the legendary transformation began. In a surge of anguish and rage, standing over his mentor's corpse in the rain, Future Trunks finally transformed into a Super Saiyan. The golden aura erupted around him as he screamed his grief to the uncaring sky, his hair standing on end and turning blonde, his eyes shifting to that distinctive teal color. He had achieved the transformation that Gohan had worked so hard to unlock in him. He had finally reached the legendary level of power that they had trained toward for years. But the cost of that achievement was unbearable. He would have given anything, would have surrendered that power gladly if it could have brought Gohan back. But nothing could bring Gohan back. Future Trunks now stood alone as Earth's final defender, a newly transformed Super Saiyan who had gained his power at the cost of everything that mattered most to him. The androids had taken his father before he was born. They had destroyed his world. And now they had killed his mentor, his friend, the person he loved most. The tragedy of Future Trunks' story was already devastating, and it had only just begun. 3 years passed after Gohan's death, 3 years during which Trunks carried on the fight alone. He continued what his mentor had started, responding when the androids attacked settlements, saving what lives he could, providing the same flicker of resistance that Gohan had offered for 13 years. But Trunks knew, just as Gohan had known, that he could not defeat androids 17 and 18. Even as a Super Saiyan, even with the legendary power flowing through his veins, he was simply not strong enough to overcome them both. The situation seemed hopeless, an endless cycle of survival and loss with no path toward actual victory. But Bulma, brilliant Bulma, who had lost her friends and her lover and watched her world collapse into nightmare, refused to accept that hopelessness. She had been working on a project, a desperate gambit that represented humanity's last chance for salvation. If they could not save their own timeline, if the future was truly lost, then perhaps they could save the past. Bulma was building a time machine. The scientific and engineering challenges involved in such a project were staggering, beyond anything humanity had attempted before. Time travel required understanding physics at a level that made space travel look simple by comparison. It required technology that didn't exist, materials that had to be fabricated from scratch, energy sources powerful enough to tear holes in the fabric of space-time itself. It required solving problems that the greatest minds of Earth working together might have struggled with, and Bulma was attempting it essentially alone in the ruins of civilization. But if anyone could accomplish the impossible, it was Bulma Brief. She had built Dragon Ball radars that could locate mystical objects scattered across an entire planet. She had created gravity chambers that could simulate the crushing pressure of worlds dozens of times more massive than Earth. She had designed spaceships capable of interstellar travel. Now, she poured all her genius into creating a machine that could transport someone backward through time itself. The work consumed years of her life, countless hours spent in her laboratory, surrounded by schematics and prototypes and failed experiments. She scavenged parts from the ruins of civilization, repurposed technology from before the android apocalypse, and fabricated components that no longer existed anywhere else on Earth. She worked through problems that would have defeated lesser scientists, finding solutions through sheer brilliance and determination. Failure was not an option, because if she failed, humanity had no future. The plan, once the time machine was complete, was elegantly simple in concept, if staggeringly complex in execution. Trunks would travel back in time to before the androids emerged, to a point where Goku was still alive and the Z-Fighters stood ready to defend Earth. He would warn them about the android threat, giving them time to prepare. More importantly, he would bring medicine for the heart virus that had killed Goku in this timeline, a cure that had been developed too late to save him here, but could save him in the past. With Goku alive and the Z-Fighters prepared, the past might avoid the catastrophe that had destroyed the future. And if they succeeded, if the past defeated the androids, then Trunks could learn from them. He could train with warriors like Goku and Vegeta, could grow stronger than he had ever become in his own timeline, could return to the future with the power needed to finally defeat androids 17 and 18. It was hope built on hope, a desperate plan that required everything to go right. But it was the only chance they had. There were moral dimensions to this plan that troubled both Bulma and Trunks. They would be creating a divergent timeline, a separate reality where things went differently. Even if they succeeded perfectly, even if the past defeated the androids and lived in peace, it wouldn't change Trunks' own future. His timeline would still be the apocalyptic nightmare it had always been. The people who had died would still be dead. The cities that had fallen would still be ruins. They would be saving a different version of Earth, an alternate reality, not their own. But what was the alternative? To simply accept defeat? To let the androids continue their reign of terror until humanity was completely extinct? At least this way, some version of Earth would be saved. Some timeline would avoid the horror that had consumed their world. And Trunks would have a chance to grow strong enough to save his own future, even if it required help from the past to get there. When Bulma finally completed the time machine in age 783, it represented the culmination of years of impossible work. The device was larger than expected, requiring its own capsule for storage, its distinctive dome shape housing the cockpit and the temporal displacement technology that would tear holes in time itself. Bulma had poured everything she had into this machine, her genius and her hope and her desperate love for a son who represented the future's only chance. She prepared Trunks for his mission with the thoroughness that the situation demanded. She gave him the medicine for Goku's heart virus, carefully preserved and protected because the entire mission's success depended on delivering it successfully. She programmed the time machine with the coordinates and temporal calculations needed to reach the past at the correct moment. She went over the mission parameters repeatedly, making sure Trunks understood what he needed to do and when he needed to do it. And then she sent her son back in time to save a world that wasn't even his own. Future Trunks' first arrival in the main timeline occurred in age 764, appearing shortly before Frieza and his father, King Cold, arrived on Earth. The temporal calculations had been precise, dropping Trunks into the timeline at a crucial moment. He materialized in a flash of light. The time machine's distinctive sound announcing his arrival, stepping out into a world that still lived in peace, that had not yet experienced the android apocalypse. For someone who had grown up in ruins, surrounded by death and fear, this must have been overwhelming. The cities were intact, filled with living people going about their daily lives in safety they didn't appreciate because they had never known its absence. The sky was clear, unpolluted by the smoke of burning settlements. The air carried the sounds of normal life rather than the eerie silence of a dead world. But there was no time to process these feelings, no opportunity to explore this miraculous world where people lived without fear. Frieza and King Cold were coming. And while Trunks knew that Goku would eventually arrive to face them, he also knew that he could prevent the unnecessary destruction their landing would cause. So he waited at the coordinates where the tyrants would arrive, standing ready with his sword on his back, preparing to face enemies who had terrorized the galaxy. When Frieza and King Cold landed, when their massive ship touched down and the mechanical tyrant emerged alongside his father, Future Trunks stepped forward to confront them. The Z-Fighters who had assembled to face this threat watched in confusion as this strange young man with a sword challenged the Emperor of the Universe. They didn't know who he was, couldn't sense anything particularly extraordinary about his power level in his base form, had no idea what this teenager thought he could accomplish against Frieza. Then Trunks transformed into a Super Saiyan, his hair flashing gold and his power exploding to levels that shocked everyone present. The Z-Fighters, who had only ever seen Goku achieve this transformation, watched in astonishment as another Super Saiyan appeared, as this mysterious youth unleashed power that rivaled what Goku had displayed on Namek. Frieza and King Cold, who had terrorized the universe for generations, suddenly found themselves facing someone who matched the warrior who had defeated them before. The battle was brutally efficient. Trunks cut through Frieza's soldiers effortlessly, his sword slicing through alien warriors like a hot blade through butter. When Frieza attacked him directly, Trunks blocked the tyrant's energy attacks with casual ease, demonstrating power far beyond what Frieza had expected from this unknown Saiyan. Frieza tried his tricks, his transformations, his desperate attempts to overcome this opponent, but nothing worked. Trunks was simply too strong, too skilled, too determined. He killed Frieza with his sword, cutting the mechanical tyrant to pieces before obliterating what remained with an energy blast that left no trace of the Emperor's existence. King Cold, seeing his son destroyed so easily, tried to bargain and then attack when negotiation failed. Trunks killed him too, ending the Cold dynasty with clinical efficiency. In the span of minutes, he had eliminated threats that had cast shadows over the entire universe. The Z-Fighters could only watch in stunned silence as this stranger accomplished what should have required Goku's intervention. Who was this young man? Where did he come from? How did he possess such incredible power? Trunks told them to wait, that someone else was coming who would want to hear what he had to say. And shortly after, Goku arrived via instant transmission, appearing at the battlefield and greeting everyone with his characteristic cheerfulness. For Trunks, seeing Goku alive and healthy and smiling must have been almost painful. This was the legendary warrior whose death from the heart virus had doomed his timeline, standing before him in the prime of his strength. Trunks asked to speak with Goku privately, and the two of them flew to a distant location where they could talk without being overheard. There, Future Trunks revealed his identity and his mission. He explained that he came from the future, from a timeline where everyone had died and the androids had destroyed the world. He told Goku about the heart virus that would kill him in 3 years if left untreated. He described the android threat that would emerge 6 months after Goku's death, overwhelming the sea fighters and devastating Earth. And he gave Goku the medicine that could save his life, the cure for the heart virus that had been developed too late in his timeline but could prevent the tragedy here. He warned Goku not to take the medicine until the symptoms appeared, since using it too early would render it ineffective. Everything depended on Goku surviving to face the androids. Trunks also revealed his own identity during that private conversation, though he asked Goku not to share the specifics with anyone else, particularly Vegeta. He was Bulma and Vegeta's son from the future, born into a world that his father would never see because Vegeta had died fighting the androids before Trunks was even born. For Trunks, meeting his father's rival and the man who had inspired Vegeta to keep pushing himself stronger must have been bittersweet. Here was Goku, alive and well and smiling, the warrior whose death had set in motion the cascade of tragedies that destroyed his timeline. Goku promised to keep Trunks' identity secret and to take the medicine when the symptoms appeared. The two returned to the group, where Trunks simply stated that the androids would appear in 3 years and that everyone should train for the coming battle. Then he returned to his time machine and departed back to his own era, leaving the Z fighters to prepare for a threat they now knew was coming. Trunks returned to the past 3 years later, arriving on the day the androids were scheduled to appear. He found that his warning had been heeded, that the Z fighters had trained diligently in preparation for this threat. More importantly, Goku was still alive, the medicine having successfully cured the heart virus when it manifested. The timeline had already diverged from the one Trunks knew. Subtle changes accumulating as decisions made differently created a new path forward. When the androids emerged, Trunks immediately realized something was wrong. These were not the androids from his timeline. Android 19 and 20 appeared instead of 17 and 18. Their designs and power levels completely different from what he had expected. The confusion was eventually resolved when it was revealed that Dr. Gero himself had become Android 20, and that the androids Trunks knew were still dormant in the laboratory. The situation spiraled into chaos when androids 17 and 18 were eventually activated, and they awakened Android 16 as well, creating a threat landscape even more complex than Trunks had anticipated. Then came the revelation that would define the next phase of the conflict. Cell, a bio-android from the future, had also traveled back in time using a different time machine, arriving years earlier than Trunks to grow and absorb energy from humans while waiting for the androids to appear. Cell's origin story revealed a grim detail about the timelines. The Cell who appeared in the main timeline came from yet another alternate future, one where Trunks had successfully shut down androids 17 and 18, using a remote control device that Bulma had created in the main timeline. In that unseen timeline, Trunks had defeated the androids without needing to become as powerful as he would in the main timeline, using technology rather than strength to win. But Cell, who had been developing in that timeline for years, ambushed Trunks when he was preparing to return to the past one final time to share the good news of his victory. Cell killed that version of Trunks, stole his time machine, and traveled back to a point even earlier than when Trunks had first arrived, creating the conditions that would eventually allow him to absorb the androids and achieve his perfect form. The complexity of the timeline situation was staggering, but the immediate reality was clear. Cell represented a threat potentially greater than the androids themselves. The bio-android possessed the cells and techniques of the greatest fighters in history, combined with Saiyan potential for growth and Namekian regeneration. His goal was to absorb androids 17 and 18 to achieve his perfect form, at which point his power would be unimaginable. Future Trunks trained desperately alongside the Z fighters to prepare for Cell. He entered the hyperbolic time chamber with Vegeta, spending a year in the chamber's accelerated time, while only a day passed outside, training with his father for the first time in his life. The experience was complicated for Trunks. Vegeta in this timeline was different from the man who had died in Trunks' future, having had years to develop relationships and grudging attachments that the future Vegeta never experienced. But Vegeta was still Vegeta, still proud and demanding and obsessed with surpassing Goku, still harsh and difficult even with his own son. During their time in the hyperbolic time chamber, both Vegeta and Trunks pushed beyond the normal Super Saiyan transformation, achieving what became known as Super Saiyan Grade 2 and beyond. Trunks in particular achieved Super Saiyan Grade 3, also called Ultra Super Saiyan, a form that massively increased his power and muscle mass. When he emerged from the chamber and eventually fought Cell, Trunks demonstrated this transformation, his muscles bulging to enormous proportions as his power skyrocketed. But Cell revealed the fatal flaw in this transformation. While Trunks had indeed become stronger than Cell in terms of raw power, the massive increase in muscle mass came at a devastating cost to speed and energy efficiency. Trunks was too slow to land hits on Cell, his movements sluggish despite his tremendous strength. The form consumed energy at an unsustainable rate, and the enlarged muscles actually hindered his movement. Cell explained this calmly, demonstrating the same transformation himself to show Trunks exactly why it was useless in actual combat. Power, without the speed to apply it, was meaningless. It was a humbling lesson, one that demonstrated the difference between strength and combat effectiveness. Trunks had been so focused on becoming stronger, on surpassing his limits through sheer power, that he had overlooked the fundamental principle that Goku would later demonstrate. Mastery and efficiency mattered more than raw strength. Goku and Gohan's approach of mastering the base Super Saiyan form, remaining in it constantly to eliminate the energy drain and stress, proved far more effective than the bulky transformations that Vegeta and Trunks had pursued. For future Trunks, watching Gohan in this timeline must have been intensely bittersweet. This was a different Gohan from his mentor, a Gohan who still had both arms, who had grown up with his father, who had not been scarred by 13 years of lonely warfare. This Gohan was gentler, less hardened by trauma, but also possessed latent power that far surpassed what Future Gohan had ever achieved. When Cell pushed this Gohan too far, when the bio-android killed Android 16 and traumatized Gohan deliberately to draw out his hidden power, something awakened in Goku's son. Gohan transformed into Super Saiyan 2, the first time anyone had achieved this legendary level beyond the legendary transformation itself. His power doubled the moment he transformed, surpassing Cell completely despite the bio-android having achieved his perfect form. Trunks watched in awe as this Gohan, this version of his mentor from a different timeline, who had been given opportunities Future Gohan never had, completely dominated perfect Cell with power that seemed impossible. The Cell games ended with Gohan destroying Cell in a final clash of energy beams, with Goku sacrificing himself via instant transmission to save Earth when Cell tried to self-destruct, and the Z Fighters using the Dragon Balls to wish back everyone Cell had killed. Future Trunks was restored to life after Cell killed him during the battle, wished back alongside the other casualties. The threat was over, the androids defeated, Cell destroyed. For Future Trunks, the experience of fighting alongside the Z Fighters in their prime, of training with Vegeta and seeing Goku alive and witnessing Gohan unlock power beyond anything Future Gohan had achieved, was both inspiring and painful. This timeline had succeeded where his had failed. These warriors had saved their world while his world had fallen to ruin. But he had learned from them, had grown stronger through training with them, had gained power and knowledge he could use to finally save his own timeline. When he returned to his future, he was ready to change his world's fate. Future Trunks returned to his apocalyptic timeline significantly stronger than when he had left. The training in the hyperbolic time chamber, the battles against the androids and Cell in the main timeline, the lessons learned from his failures and victories, all of it had pushed his power to levels that his timeline's androids 17 and 18 could not match. He had left as a warrior who could barely survive encounters with the androids. He returned as someone who had fought perfect Cell and lived. When Future Trunks confronted future androids 17 and 18, the battle was shockingly one-sided. The androids who had terrorized Earth for 17 years, who had killed the Z Fighters and Gohan and devastated civilization, found themselves completely outmatched. Trunks had surpassed them, his power gained from training in the past eclipsing their strength entirely. He destroyed them both, ending their reign of terror in a battle that was almost anticlimactic compared to the years of suffering they had caused. For the first time since the androids had emerged, Earth was safe. The threat that had hung over humanity for nearly 2 decades was finally eliminated. Survivors emerged from hiding, hardly daring to believe that the nightmare was truly over. The world could begin rebuilding. Civilization could start to recover from the devastation. There was hope again. Real hope. Not the desperate kind that Gohan had represented, but actual hope for a future without fear. Trunks and Bulma celebrated their victory, savoring this moment they had worked toward for so long. The time machine project that had seemed like such a desperate gambit had succeeded beyond their hopes. Trunks had saved the past and gained the strength to save his own future. Everything had worked. 3 years passed, 3 years of peace, of rebuilding, of gradually recovering from the android apocalypse. The Earth was still scarred, still wounded, the population still devastated compared to what it had been before the androids. But it was healing. Cities were being rebuilt, infrastructure restored, communities reforming as survivors gathered together to create something better from the ruins. Trunks planned to make one final trip to the past, to visit the Z fighters and tell them the good news that their timeline had been saved. It would be a joyful reunion, a chance to thank them for the training and support that had made victory possible. He prepared the time machine for the journey, looking forward to seeing Goku and Vegeta and Gohan again, to showing them that their help had not been in vain. But Trunks had learned about Cell in the main timeline. He knew that a version of Cell existed in his own timeline as well, still developing in Dr. Gero's laboratory beneath the ruins. He knew what Cell was capable of, how dangerous the bio-android would become if allowed to reach his perfect form. He could not leave that threat alive, could not let Cell potentially emerge years later to threaten the peace they had finally achieved. So, before making his trip to the past, Trunks called out for Cell, announcing his presence and challenging the bio-android to face him. He would not repeat the mistake of the unseen timeline where Cell had ambushed his alternate self. He would confront this threat directly, destroy Cell while the bio-android was still in his imperfect form, and ensure that his timeline was truly safe. Cell emerged from hiding, his grotesque imperfect form sizing up this Super Saiyan, who had somehow discovered his existence. In the unseen timeline, Cell had successfully ambushed and killed Trunks, stealing the time machine to travel to the past. But this Trunks was different, stronger, prepared for Cell's existence and ready for combat. The fight was decisive. Trunks had trained in the hyperbolic time chamber, had fought perfect Cell in the main timeline, had achieved power far beyond what his timeline Cell could match in his imperfect state. He destroyed the bio-android completely, obliterating Cell with an energy attack that left nothing behind. The threat was eliminated, the last remnant of Dr. Gero's revenge finally erased. Future Trunks' timeline was saved. The androids were destroyed, Cell was dead, and the Earth could rebuild in peace. Everything Bulma and Gohan and Trunks had worked toward, all the sacrifice and struggle and desperate hope had finally paid off. The future was secure. For 17 years, Future Trunks lived in that peace. 17 years where he helped rebuild civilization, where he worked alongside other survivors to create a better world from the ashes of the old one. He grew from a teenager into a man, watching the population recover, seeing cities rise from ruins, witnessing hope transform from a desperate dream into tangible reality. During this time, Trunks also faced another threat that emerged in his timeline. The wizard Babidi and his servant Dabura arrived on Earth, seeking to resurrect the ancient monster Majin Buu. But future Trunks, fighting alongside future Supreme Kai, stopped them before Buu could be revived. The battle claimed future Shin's life, and because the Supreme Kai and God of Destruction's lives were linked, Beerus died as well. Future Trunks didn't know it at the time, but this would have devastating consequences years later. But for those 17 years, despite the occasional threat, the future timeline knew something it had not experienced since before Trunks was born: peace. Then Goku Black appeared. The being who called himself Goku Black arrived without warning in future Trunks' timeline. He looked exactly like Goku, identical in appearance to the legendary warrior who had saved the main timeline. But there was something fundamentally wrong about him, something dark and malevolent that radiated from this twisted version of Earth's greatest hero. Goku Black was not Goku. He was something far worse, a being of divine origin who had stolen Goku's body for his own purposes. His true identity was Zamasu, a Supreme Kai in training from Universe 10 who had become convinced that mortals were inherently evil and needed to be eradicated for the good of the multiverse. Zamasu had used the Super Dragon Balls to switch bodies with Goku, killing the real Goku's family and using the stolen Saiyan body to gain power that combined divine ki with Saiyan potential for growth. Black began systematically exterminating humanity in future Trunks' timeline. He was not like the androids, who killed for sport or amusement. Black killed with divine purpose, viewing the deaths of mortals as righteous acts that would purify the universe. His power was overwhelming, far beyond anything the androids had possessed, operating on a completely different level. Within a year of Black's arrival, he had killed over half of Earth's population. The civilization that had spent 17 years rebuilding itself crumbled again under this new assault. Cities that had risen from android ruins were destroyed again. People who had survived one apocalypse found themselves trapped in another. A woman named Mai rallied the survivors, forming a resistance movement to fight back against Goku Black. Mai was actually an adult who had been wished young again by the Dragon Balls years earlier in the main timeline. Then her future counterpart had simply never died in future Trunks' timeline. She organized what remained of humanity into a fighting force, arming them with whatever weapons they could salvage and leading them in guerrilla warfare against an enemy they had no hope of defeating. Future Trunks fought Black repeatedly, transforming into Super Saiyan 2 to battle this enemy who wore Goku's face. But Black was too strong, his power growing every time they fought, as the Saiyan body he inhabited adapted to combat and pushed past its limits. Trunks could not defeat him, could barely survive their encounters. Normal weapons had no effect on Black whatsoever, making the Resistance's efforts heroic but ultimately futile. Mai saved Trunks' life during one encounter with Black, using a flash bomb to distract the false Goku and allowing Trunks to escape when he was on the verge of death. The two grew closer during the resistance, forming a bond that would become romantic as they fought together against impossible odds. But the situation was hopeless. Black was too powerful, and there was no one in their timeline who could stop him. Bulma, elderly now but still brilliant, used what few resources remained to fuel the time machine for one more trip. It would be a one-way journey because they didn't have enough fuel for a return trip. But it offered the only hope they had left. Trunks could travel to the main timeline, find Goku and Vegeta, bring them back to help defeat Black. Goku Black attacked while they were preparing the time machine, sensing what they were attempting. Bulma sacrificed herself to buy Trunks time to escape. Her death, a deliberate act of love to save her son and give their timeline one last chance. Future Trunks fled into the time machine and activated it, traveling back to the main timeline while his mother died behind him. He arrived in the present timeline battered and desperate, immediately encountering Goku and needing to explain the nightmare that his future had become. The confusion was immense because from the main timeline's perspective, Trunks had succeeded years ago. They had assumed his timeline was safe. Learning that a being wearing Goku's face was systematically exterminating humanity in the future shocked everyone. Goku Black followed Trunks through time using a time ring, a divine artifact that allowed travel between timelines. The first battle between Goku and Black in the present timeline demonstrated just how powerful this enemy was. Black matched Super Saiyan Blue Goku, fighting on even terms with a transformation that represented the combination of Super Saiyan power and godly Kai. The situation became even more complex when the full scope of the threat was revealed. There were two Zamasus involved in this plot. The Zamasu from the main timeline had been killed by Beerus after his plans were discovered. But in Future Trunks' timeline, where Beerus was already dead, that timeline's Zamasu had partnered with Goku Black. The two versions of the same person worked together, with Black providing overwhelming power in Goku's stolen body, while Future Zamasu supplied immortality granted by a wish on the Super Dragon Balls. Future Trunks made multiple trips between the timelines, bringing Goku and Vegeta to fight in his future, then returning to the present when they needed to recover or strategize. Each visit to his timeline revealed more devastation, more death. The world he had fought so hard to save being systematically destroyed by enemies who believed they were acting righteously. During these battles, Future Trunks achieved a new transformation out of sheer desperation and rage. Super Saiyan Rage, a form unique to him that combined elements of Super Saiyan Blue's godly ki with his own emotional intensity, gave him power beyond normal Super Saiyan 2. His aura turned blue and gold, his eyes became blue, and his strength increased enough that he could actually fight Goku Black and Zamasu without being instantly overwhelmed. It was not enough to win, not enough to actually defeat immortal Zamasu or the constantly adapting Black, but it was enough to resist. The final battle in Future Trunks' timeline saw Goku, Vegeta and Trunks fighting together against Black and Zamasu. Vegeta's training had allowed him to surpass Black's power, and he destroyed the false Goku in a brutal display of a father's rage at someone who had tormented his son. But Future Zamasu remained, and his immortality made him impossible to kill. In desperation, Zamasu and Black's essence fused, using Potara earrings, creating fused Zamasu, a being of terrifying power who combined the strength of Goku's body with true immortality. Even this fused form was eventually damaged enough that Zamasu's body began breaking down. The conflict between his immortal half and Black's mortal half causing instability. But Zamasu refused to accept defeat. His essence spread across the entire universe, his will becoming infinite Zamasu, a cosmic horror that merged with reality itself. He became the sky, the air, everything, his face appearing in the heavens as his power threatened to consume not just Earth, but all of existence. Future Trunks channeled the energy of the remaining humans into his sword, creating the Sword of Hope, a spiritual weapon formed from humanity's refusal to surrender, even in the face of divine annihilation. He used this blade to cut through fused Zamasu's physical form, splitting the corrupted deity in half in an attack that should have been impossible. For a moment, it seemed like Future Trunks had saved his timeline through the power of hope itself. But infinite Zamasu could not be destroyed by mortal power. His essence continued spreading, threatening to consume everything. Goku, in desperation, summoned Future Zeno, the Omni-King of Future Trunks' timeline, the supreme deity who possessed the power to erase anything from existence. Future Zeno looked at the corrupted universe, at infinite Zamasu spreading across reality like cancer, and made his decision. He erased everything. Future Zeno did not simply destroy Zamasu. He erased the entire timeline, all of reality in Future Trunks' universe, wiping it from existence to ensure that infinite Zamasu was completely eliminated. The Earth, the stars, the fabric of space-time itself, all of it ceased to exist. Future Trunks and Mai watched their entire world disappear around them. The planet they had fought so hard to save, the civilization they had spent 17 years rebuilding, the peace they had finally achieved before Black arrived, all of it was erased as if it had never existed. Everyone who had survived the androids, everyone who had endured Black's assault, everyone in the entire universe, dead in an instant as reality itself was deleted. They only survived because they were standing near Goku and Vegeta when the erasure happened, protected by proximity to the person who had summoned Zeno. They returned to the main timeline as refugees from a world that no longer existed. The psychological devastation of this moment cannot be adequately expressed in words. Future Trunks had already lost everything once to the androids. He had grown up in Apocalypse, watched Gohan die, fought for years in a hopeless war. He had finally saved his timeline, finally achieved peace, only to have it destroyed again by Goku Black. He had fought desperately against Zamasu, achieved new transformations, channeled humanity's hope into a sword of light. He had cut down God, and in the end, his reward for victory was watching his entire universe cease to exist. Everything he had fought for, everyone he had tried to save gone. His mother Bulma, dead before he escaped to the past. Future Gohan, dead years ago fighting the androids. Every friend, every survivor, every person who had placed their hope in him erased from existence itself. His timeline did not just die, it was deleted, removed from reality as thoroughly as if it had never been. Whis attempted to offer comfort by creating an alternate solution. He transported Trunks and Mai to a point in time just before Zamasu and Black's plan began in another timeline, creating a divergent reality where two versions of Trunks would exist. In this new timeline, Beerus destroyed Zamasu before he could steal Goku's body, preventing the tragedy from ever occurring. But this was not Future Trunks' timeline. This was yet another alternate reality, another divergent universe where things went differently. The people here were not the ones he had fought beside. The Mai in this timeline was not the woman who had saved his life with a flash bomb. This was a world that would never experience the tragedies he had endured, but that also meant it was fundamentally not his home. Future Trunks was a man without a timeline, a refugee from a reality that had been erased from existence. He and Mai settled into this new timeline, trying to build a life in a universe that was almost but not quite the one they had lost. They had each other, and they had safety, and they had a future free from androids or divine genocidalists. But they also had the knowledge that their real world, the one they had been born into and fought for and bled for, was gone forever. Future Trunks' story is perhaps the most tragic in all of Dragon Ball because of the sheer scope and repetition of his losses. He lost his father before he was born, killed by androids before he drew his first breath. He grew up in Apocalypse, his childhood stolen by a world of ruins and fear. He watched his mentor, his hero, his closest friend, die in the rain, transforming into a Super Saiyan through grief and rage. He fought for years in a hopeless war, carrying on Gohan's legacy while knowing he could not win. He traveled to the past and saved a timeline that was not his own, helping the Z fighters defeat Cell, while knowing that his victory there would not change his own future. He returned home stronger and finally defeated the androids, finally achieved the peace his world had not known for nearly 2 decades. He spent 17 years rebuilding, helping create a better world from the ashes, experiencing hope transform from dream to reality. Then Goku Black arrived and destroyed it all again. Future Trunks fought against a god wearing Goku's face, watching his mother die, seeing his world burn a second time. He achieved new transformations, born from desperation, wielded a sword of hope, granted by humanity's refusal to surrender, and cut down a corrupted deity. He did everything right, fought with everything he had, refused to give up, even when the situation seemed hopeless. And his reward was watching his entire timeline be erased from existence. The tragedy is compounded by the fact that Future Trunks never gave up. No matter how many times he lost everything, no matter how hopeless the situation became, he continued fighting. When Gohan died, he became Earth's defender. When the androids seemed unbeatable, he traveled through time to find a way to defeat them. When Goku Black destroyed his peace, he sought help from the past again. When infinite Zamasu threatened all existence, he channeled hope itself into a blade of light. He represents something fundamental about the Dragon Ball series: The idea that you keep fighting even when you cannot win, that you resist even when resistance seems futile, that you protect others even at the cost of everything you have. Future Gohan taught him that lesson, demonstrated it through 13 years of lonely battle against enemies who toyed with him. Future Trunks carried that lesson forward, embodying it even more completely than his mentor because he endured even greater losses. The cost of that heroism is almost unbearable to contemplate. Future Trunks is a man who has lost 2 entire timelines, who has watched everyone he loved die multiple times, who has achieved victory only to have it stripped away by forces beyond his control. He is a warrior without a home, living in a timeline that is close enough to his own to be painful, but different enough to never quite feel right. Yet he endures. He builds a life with Mai in this new timeline, creating hope from the ashes of loss yet again. He has been defeated more thoroughly than almost any character in the franchise, has lost more than most people could even comprehend losing, and he still chooses to move forward. That is the true legacy of Future Trunks. Not the transformations he achieved or the enemies he defeated, but the fact that he never surrendered to despair, even when despair seemed like the only rational response. He represents hope in its purest form. Not the naive belief that everything will work out, but the determined choice to keep fighting even when you know it might not. His story is tragic because it demonstrates that sometimes heroism is not rewarded, that doing everything right does not guarantee a happy ending, that the universe is not always just or fair. But it is also inspiring because it shows that meaning can be found in the struggle itself, that protecting others and refusing to surrender has value, even when it does not result in victory. Future Trunks grew up in hell, lost everything twice, and still chose to build a life defined by hope rather than bitterness. He is a warrior shaped by tragedy who refused to let that tragedy define him completely. He carries the memory of 2 dead timelines, honors them by continuing to fight for the one he has left. His sword, which started as Tapion's gift in the anime continuity or simply a weapon he carried in the manga, became a symbol of his resolve. When he channeled humanity's hope into that blade, when he struck down Fused Zamasu with the sword of hope, he demonstrated that mortal determination could challenge even divine power. The attack did not save his timeline in the end, but it proved that gods could be made to bleed, that mortals were not helpless before beings who claimed cosmic authority. Future Trunks lost his timeline, but won something perhaps more important: the proof that hope and determination matter even in the face of inevitable defeat. He showed that the fight itself has meaning, that resistance against overwhelming darkness is worthwhile, even when you cannot win. That choosing to protect others and never surrender defines heroism more than any victory ever could. In the end, Future Trunks' story is about endurance. It is about continuing forward when everything has been taken from you, about building new hope from the ruins of old dreams, about finding reasons to fight even when all your previous reasons have been erased from existence. He is the man who lost everything and kept going anyway, who faced 2 apocalypses and survived both, who watched his entire universe cease to exist and still chose to build a future. That is the tragic story of Future Trunks, a hero shaped by loss who refused to let that loss destroy him, a warrior from a dead timeline who honors his fallen world by protecting the one he has left, a man who has every reason to despair but chooses hope anyway. So, if you enjoyed this deep dive into the heartbreaking journey of Future Trunks, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more Dragon Ball lore content. Let me know in the comments what other stories from the Dragon Ball universe you'd like me to explore. And until next time, may you find the strength to keep fighting even when everything seems lost, just like Future Trunks did.